Welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast, where trauma survivors become healthy thrivers. Each month will feature a theme in the trauma recovery and empowerment field. To promote your recovery, healing, and learning how to build dreams, here's your host, Karen Robinson, transformational coach and therapist.
Welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast. Today, our delightful guest is Deb Curtis. Deb is a remarkable woman who has overcome many obstacles in her personal and professional life. She is the founder of a woman-owned small business. She's recovering from a top-performing 30-year corporate position and is a passionate advocate for promoting diversity and inclusiveness in entrepreneurship. Having faced adversity in a male-dominated industry, this dynamic entrepreneur aims to educate and empower minority populations, including women and people of color, to climb the ladder of business ownership by acquiring established, profitable small businesses within the SBA. And the SBA is Small Business Administration. Thank you for being here, Deb.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Karen. It's my honor and privilege, so I appreciate the time.
So, as you may or may not know, my primary audience is women, usually over 40, a lot of times over 50. Who are recovering from histories of childhood abuse or other traumas. Is this something that fits you, would you say?
Yes, it does. I am a woman that is over 50. My birthday is coming up and I'll be a young 56 years of age. You rah rah sis boom ba. And I am here to share with you my childhood experiences and trauma at the age of 9. So yes, I really believe part of our past growing up, it has developed us into who we are today and our passions for others and in helping them heal. At the same token, you're helping me heal. So thank you. It doesn't sound like it in my biography when you spoke to it, but I knew I would be a fit based on all the goodness that you do with your podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry that you had trauma at such a young age. Without going into great detail, are you able to give us a little more context on what happened?
Oh, sure. I absolutely can. When I came from a family that was a family of 5, I was the youngest of 3 daughters, and my parents married when they were very young. I think my mom was 16 and my dad was 18. And my mom was adopted and did not know who her parents were or her biological family. I didn't know much of any of that when I was young, obviously. That's just something you don't grasp at a toddler or age 8 or 9 years old. But as I grew older, I started to learn why the impact that I experienced as a child was happening. So my dad was from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and our family lived on the south side of Milwaukee, and that's where I was born. And when I was about age 8, he decided to take the family, my 2 older sisters and I and my mom, to move us out of the city to a rural area in Wisconsin, just to kind of help give the family an opportunity to grow outside of the city, but yet be close enough to the metropolitan market as we got older. And we moved to a rural area. And that was when the family started to change as far as the marriage of my parents. My dad worked full time in a factory, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom, just like most were back in the day, right? The husbands were the breadwinner, and most often the moms were the stay home, taking care of the children and making sure supper was on the table at 5. Well, when we moved to the rural area, Karen, which is ironic because you would think there's issues like this in the city and maybe it doesn't touch the rural area. Well, as we all know, it touches every area of the country and of the world as far as drugs, alcohol abuse, domestic abuse, and all of those areas. And she got involved, my mom, being a stay-home mom, into drugs and alcohol. Back then, it was the 70s, and Valium was the painkiller, I believe, of choice, and one that everyone, oddly, many of the women in that subdivision that we moved to were just into taking painkillers and then home and drinking. And over time, she just became sidetracked in the wrong activities, meaning starting to have affairs with other people, men and women, and just totally took a 360. And my dad, I still recall that to this day, they used to argue. So there was a lot of reasons why he said he was going to leave, and he's filing for divorce. He tried to reconcile, but she can't turn her life around. He packed up his bags, and I was 9 at the time, and I knew my mom had issues. She used to whip the bird at him in front of me and call him all kinds of terrible names, and they would argue, and it got ugly. It really got ugly. So he had to call it quits because it wasn't good for me to witness that. And my mom got full custody of me when he moved out. And that Karen, maybe many of your listeners would understand, back in the 70s, it was almost a given that the moms were granted full custody immediately when there was a divorce. So she claimed that she would get better. He moved out. I only saw him like every other weekend, sometimes only one weekend a month, depending upon schedules and such. And my mom started to spiral out of hand even further. And one of my older sisters got into drugs and drinking because my mom partied with her in the house. And over time, I was 10, there were parties at the house, night after night, during the day, drugs. People would come to buy drugs at the house. And I was 10 years old. They tried to, jokingly have me drink or smoke weed or do that kind of stuff, but I passed. I knew I had to get up to go to school the next day, even though there were obnoxious, loud parties. It just got out of hand, but I still went to school every day, and I hid all of what was going on at home. I didn't want people to know that my home was broken at 10 years of age. Over time, the police put restraining orders on my mom, or warnings that you can't have parties here anymore, or we're going to arrest you. And obviously they knew there were drugs and stuff. So what happened then was she left and told me, it started out a couple of nights that she's going to go away, but she'll be back. And I was living at home by myself because my 2 older sisters were grown up and out of the house already. And each time that she would come back, I still remember to this day, she'd leave me a little, like an 8-pack of those Hostess donuts that are in a little package on a dresser, my bedroom dresser, with a note that, "Hey, hon, I'm back, but you're at school. I'm going to be gone for another week." And then all of a sudden, each time she did that, she'd give me more donuts because there was no other food in the house. And each time it was further and further apart, but I could not say anything per her direction to school, to the authorities, to my dad. I was threatened not to say anything. That was just point blank. That's what she wanted. So I didn't know. She talked bad about my dad, so I didn't know, and I just believed her. And over time, my oldest sister, she was going to a university within driving distance from where we lived. And I would say over an 18-month period, this was going on, where there were stretches of weeks and my mom was never around, but I still went to school and hid everything. People always ask me, how did you eat? Because the house was a mess. We had animals, nothing was taken care of. The fridge was moldy, full of old food. And I told them I learned how to make friends and be invited over for supper. I learned how to do that. I just developed a personality to hang around with a lot of friends and find a way for them to feed me supper. But I also believe, Karen, that back then, the see something, say something, it wasn't happening. The neighbors knew, I'm sure of it, because why was I constantly eating over at their home all the time? And I believe school had a sense of it because I became sensitive, trying to hold back what was going on in my life, and my grades were starting to plummet. But nobody did anything about it. And I still think that that happens today, but we can talk about that later. So I'm going to pause because there's another half to this story, another chapter before it kind of flips. So what are your thoughts? I don't know if you have a question out of that, or should I just keep going?
I do have a couple of questions, and maybe you would get there. So your sister, the one in university, did they know? What was their role in this? Yeah.
I have two older sisters, and to this day, I'm 56 years old. I don't have a relationship with them. Never had. So if anybody has sisters, and my husband, his sisters, they're like best friends, and they show up for each other's kids' events. Mine don't, because of the broken childhood that we endured. The two oldest sisters were about 6 years older than me, but they were a year and a half apart. And one still lived at home, but on a very part-time basis. And she started drinking at age 14. I remember during those parties when I was 9 with my mom. They smoked pot, they did drugs, they drank. My mom hung out with my sister's friends because they were close in age pretty much, because they were young parents to begin with. It's just kind of odd how it worked. Maybe there was like a 15-year difference, but I guess alcohol, it doesn't matter if you're going to be a drinker, you're going to be a drinker and hang out with people that drink. So she knew what was going on, but she didn't want me to say anything because she was having the time of her life, just partying with my mom. And then my other sister was in the military. So she was gone a lot, but when she would come home every now and then, she noticed the home was going to pot. And she noticed that my mom, our mom, was never around. And I didn't know. She was starting to track it in her mind because the distance between coming home to see me was pretty far apart. And every time she came home, there was nobody there, and the house looked worse than it did 90 days prior, right? So did that answer your story? They had no clue, or the oldest one started picking up that something's not right here. And then that's when she contacted my father to let him know. And he started tracking and kind of spying on the house, so to speak, to see if my mom was ever coming around, and she wasn't. So he contacted the authorities and the police, and they did an investigation of just tracking everything as well, and noticed that this 10-year-old girl is walking home from school and going to school on her own in the morning, and there's no parents, nobody's there. So immediately there was an order for my dad to get temporary custody of me at that age. So they moved me out of that rundown drug house. My mom wasn't even around, and my mom didn't even know I was gone until she came back a couple weeks later from one of her rendezvous that she was on. And then the court battle started because my mom wanted to fight for custody to keep me because she was so bitter at my dad. So any other questions, or should I continue on for you?
I do want to ask a couple more questions, and then you're welcome to carry on.
Yeah.
Is your mom, and it's probably jumping way ahead, but is your mom still alive? And if so, what's your relationship like with her?
And we're going to get to that. That's part of the ending story. So
yes,
good question though, Karen, because most would think no, but there's a lot to it. And I can condense it real quick here. So when my mom came back and saw that I was gone, she knew she had a citation, so to speak, against her, and she was ordered court orders about custody, that my dad wanted full custody of me. And it ended up being in the 70s, again, when a divorce happens, fine, mom gets custody. But then when there's a custody battle, again, usually the judge will rule the kids got to go with the mom. It just was a thing back then that the children must go with the mom, no matter what was going on with the mom. And believe it or not, my dad tried to fight this case over 12 months to win custody, and he wasn't winning. My mom had an attorney, and for whatever reason, the judge still thought she needs to go with her mom. That's who she needs. She's a daughter. She needs to be with her mom. My dad's working. How is that going to work? You know, she's never going to be home with her father because he was working 2 jobs to make child support and alimony payments to my mom. And finally, the attorney and the counselors through the case a year later said, at that point I was 11, they talked to me to tell me that I'm still going to end up with my mom unless I would testify in court against her. And they consulted with the judge, and they felt that I was old enough, approaching 12, to state my case in front of a jury, because it just was a battle between who is going to get custody of me. Now, through this year and a half, I was seeing a counselor through the court system, but not getting any other help from like doctors or mental therapists. School knew what was going on, but they didn't really talk about it. And all I know is my grades were suffering, and I cried a lot. Nobody was around to help me do my homework. It was just very stressful, but they helped. I think they knew, and they helped me as best as they could to get me to pass, to get to the next grade. So the court hearing came about, and I, as a young 11-and-a-half-year-old, had to sit in court with my right hand raised, testifying with my mom and her attorneys on one side of the courtroom, my dad and his attorneys on the other side of the courtroom. And I was just questioned from both sides, both attorneys, and I spoke truth. And you might remember before we started this episode that I speak truth, and that's always stuck with me my whole life because I had to testify in court. So I've become this adult through the years, and this is kind of like an aha moment for me, Karen, just going through this, because I always speak truth, and I'm very much a girl who carries honesty, integrity. And if I see something wrong, guess what I do? I say something. Because
Beautiful.
Isn't that, I thank you, but these conversations kind of help me understand why I do what I do. And this was just like an aha moment right here on this episode. Anyhow, my dad finally won custody. Yay. So wonderful. And let's just say I was 12 by the time that happened. She had the rights to see me, but she abandoned me then for 40 years of my life. She was supposed to take me to orthodontist appointments to help out my dad because he worked during the day. I never went to those appointments. I probably was the kid in high school that had braces on for, I think, 6 years because it was a fight of which parent was going to take me to the orthodontist. The doctor, my orthodontist, was so upset at my parents because the braces were on forever. She never was part of any of my life. Now, my dad was. He showed up when he could, but my mom was never there. She truly did abandon me. She missed all my children. I was married twice. She missed both weddings. I mean, there were a lot more struggles with domestic abuse with my first marriage, because I feel like I was looking for love in all the wrong places from being broken with love when I was 9 years old. But so to answer your question, do I have a relationship with my mom? Today I do. And it all started when I received a phone call, March of 2020. COVID happened. And it was my mom crying on the phone that she needs help. And I knew where she lived. It was another rundown drug home at 76 years of age. She wasn't in drugs. She didn't drink. At least I don't think she did. I don't know. I don't believe she was in drugs. I could be wrong. I'm just thinking when you're 76, I hope not. but she called me crying because she lived in a 1-bedroom efficiency in a drug home, and people were dying in the bedrooms on the same floor that she was staying. And this pandemic was starting to freak her out. Like, are we all going to die? What's going to happen? She couldn't call my one sister because she's an alcoholic. She's been in jail several times. She's struggling. The oldest sister, she abandoned us. She doesn't want anything to do with the family. So anyhow, I moved my mom in with my husband of today and my 16-year-old daughter. One of the hardest things, Karen, I've ever done in my life was bring my mom, who abandoned me for 40 years, to come live with my husband and my children. And she was very bipolar and very sick mentally. It was so hard, Karen. I thought I was going to lose my husband and my family, but we hung in there and we built up a civil relationship because she's got no one else but me. Remember, she's adopted. My 2 older sisters are out of the picture. I'm it. I'm her youngest daughter. And after abandoning me for my whole life, she's leaning on me now to help her. So we mended. I forgave her, and we developed a relationship as a mother-daughter again. My husband and I found a senior apartment complex across town from where we live. She's 80 now, and she can't drive. She's on a lot of medications for her health reasons, and we take care of her groceries. She comes to visit us. We pick her up to see the children and the grandchildren. And I learned through all this forgiveness. I had to.
How?
Yeah.
Everybody's listening saying, how? What? How? How did you do it? Forgive her.
I'm telling you, I realized in my whole entire life, Karen, so many of my family members, like aunts and uncles on my dad's side, and even my dad, who's my hero today, I love him. He passed away 5 years ago. Everyone used to talk so negative about her and what she did to me. But I've always heard of forgiveness, and I've always seen stories and real life scenarios. Even recently in Milwaukee, there was a police officer that was shot and killed, and the parents of the young man were on the news just saying, don't be bitter. You know, we forgive the young man that shot him. You know, he had a lot of issues himself, and don't be bitter. We forgive him, because if we don't forgive him, we're going to carry this for the rest of our life, this burden of hate. And knowing that, and I felt that for 40 years, a burden of hate, it stole my joy, Karen. It's the unforgiveness stole my joy. And now that I'm 56 years old, thinking about this young woman, my mom, when she was a little tiny baby, she was born, had polio, and her biological parents didn't want to deal with her because she was really sick. They just gave her up and put her on a porch step at the fire station, just like you see in the movies. And that broke her, never knowing who her family was. So she was broken before she even had a chance. Now, could have she changed herself and made better decisions? Oh yeah, absolutely. But I make mistakes today. I could have made better decisions in my life. And if anything that I want her to learn is forgiveness and have a relationship with God. And she does. And she often tells me today, I'm so blessed and I don't know why he's keeping me here. And I tell her, because I'm here and I've been praying for family since I was 9 years old. And I have a husband and I have children, I have grandchildren, and now I have my mom, who is their grandma, back in their life. So I said, it's full circle. It's like an end of the story. And I would tell all your listeners, forgive, because if you don't, it just burdens you until the day you die, and you don't want to take that to the day that you die. You want to forgive no matter what. And that's my message. That's my message.
What do you say to the person, though, who's not ready to forgive, but they still want to have joy? Is there a way?
Mm. I lived without forgiving for almost my whole life. We're talking 45 years. Did I have joy? I did, but there was that burden in my heart, like over the holidays. I'm with my dad's side of the family, and I'm always thinking about my mom, and maybe she knows I'm never going to forgive her. So that's why she's staying away from me. She's probably thinking, oh my God, I did so much wrong to her. She'll never forgive me. So I'm just going to stay out of her life. And then on the other hand, I always wondered, how's she doing? And then I always knew, Karen, my clock was ticking as I was getting older. Oh, I got time for that. We'll get back together again. Oh, I've got time for that. We'll mend that relationship. If COVID didn't happen, March of 2020, I might be a different story today. Mm-hmm. So there's a reason for everything, and I'm not in control, but somehow March of 2020, she was triggered to give me a call, and that took a lot for her to ask for help. And we gave it to her. And my husband and I just had to dig deep and realize she needs us and just to forgive. So
at the beginning of our chat, you made me think that you said something that made me think. You didn't make me think. You said something that made me believe that you found some sort of strengths, or it shaped your character in some way to grow up so quickly. Like you were an adult at 10. Mm-hmm. What do you think those strengths are today?
Yeah, you're so right, because that was something said to me a lot as I was growing up. That a lot of people said you're like years ahead of everybody else. So your question is, what would I say to that, or what did I learn from that?
Yeah, what are your character strengths because you had it rough and had to grow up so quickly?
Oh, yeah. Character strengths, hands down, would be what I was just talking about earlier. The see something, say something, where I say something today, and I hear myself speak this a lot. I need to be a voice of reason for those that don't know how to speak. When things are wrong, when things aren't right. We live in a culture of silence, whether it be in our homes, which I was in that culture of silence at 9 years old. And then my first marriage was to an alcoholic with domestic abuse, and he was in jail, but I bailed him out. But you know what I did? I didn't say anything back then, Karen, because I didn't want my dad to know I was in a wrong marriage. I didn't want my work to know, my employer. So I didn't say anything. So I saw something at 9, didn't say anything. I saw something, in my early 20s and was battered and bruised and almost killed, and I didn't say anything. So through all that, I now am an advocate that you have to speak what your trials were. So maybe someone out there is hearing my message that you've got to say something to someone in order to get out of what you're in. Because if you don't, you're gonna end up dead or miserable until the day you die. So that would be one of my character strengths. Another one, besides see something, say something, and being a woman of integrity, kindness, and to strangers, and patience, because there's so much underneath all of this. And I used to go to work for corporate in my younger days with that first marriage when I was abused. And I was a top performer, pretending like nothing was wrong and that Deb Curtis had the best life ever. but it sucked. It was horrific, but I showed up and I worked and I did a damn good job, and I would go home and get in big time trouble again with my ex-husband at the time. So see something, say something, and I'm an advocate for people that don't have fair and equal treatment, because I've been one, not only personally, but professionally. And again, corporate itself breeds a environment as well where you're supposed to say something if you see something, but employees don't for fear of retaliation. Right. So there can be a lot of people that are being mentally abused at work, dismissed, disparate treatment, discriminated, passed over. I could go on
harassed.
And on. Yeah,
harassed.
All of it. And I'm sure everyone has experienced once, twice, if not more, throughout their corporate career. And you think HR, human resources, is your avenue to get help. And I've learned that that doesn't work, because they're there to protect the employer. So if you see something and say something to your human resource department, that's your ticket that they're going to find a way to push you out. And because now you're a risk to the employer, even though perhaps the supervisors of the employer were the risk to the employee. It's crazy, isn't it? It's just.
Well, I'm wondering where we ever got the idea that human resources was for the employee, because I haven't worked at a place yet where that was really true.
Isn't that true? I know. It's not. Yeah. It's not. I think maybe perhaps it was in the 80s and prior to that, but it progressively, HR you thought was where you go for help, but it's not. Today it's, you don't go to HR. And the silly monkey surveys that they do, or confidential surveys where we want to see how everybody's doing. Oh, I can remember working on teams where people are like, I'm not going to answer truthfully. I'm just going to check everything's fine, because they know who's filling these forms out. So you never get to the root of the problem. So I've become, through all of this, personally and professionally, a voice of reason, and that can still work against me in some cases, but because who I am saying something to knows they are not right for what they're doing. That can get me in trouble though, but I'm okay with that. I would rather stand up for other people for what's right, or for myself at the cost of, I'd rather do that than hide and not say something. I will not let things go wrong when I have the right to say something. And we need to be better at that as a whole, right? In our homes, in corporate,
everywhere, neighborhoods.
Yeah, neighborhoods. Good Lord, right? It's I feel like we're almost not saying anything more so now today than ever before, for fear of retaliation. So what are we going to do about that? I don't know, but I often speak, on different podcasts. I'm going to be that voice of reason. And on social media, I am going to share in a correct fashion. I'm not here to bash people, but I am here to bring awareness that we have work to do in our country, and worldwide for that matter. And our work isn't done. We got a long ways to go. And I have children and grandchildren, and I want them to grow up in a better place than where we are today.
Beautiful. So we're getting close to time, where we're over time. So my last question is, how does your experiences as a child and as a domestic violence survivor, how does that show up in your work today?
Yeah, I'm sensitive. I'm a sensitive employee, but I'm self-employed. But when I was in corporate, I was sensitive. I'm sensitive in my home and in my personal life. That's not to say I'm weak. That's what I call my superpower. And what I mean by that is, sensitive people, I truly believe, have a gut feeling about things that aren't right. And that's why they're sensitive. And when you're sensitive, you're honest, you're vulnerable. And that vulnerability breeds trust in others, because I'm not putting on a facade anymore like I did in my younger days. I'm very honest and open. So I think through the years, through everything that I've been through, because of always having to be silent, I'm now open, but I'm also sensitive. And part of that, Karen, I'm sure a lot of my hurts of all those past, I mean, we're talking 9 years old, in the 20s, in the 30s at corporate America, 40 struggling, discrimination, disparate treatment, working in an all-male industry of the only women on a team that's just being pushed out, on and on, you know, things that are said in sexual formats that shouldn't be talked about on an all-man team in a vehicle when she's the only one in the car, stuff like that. That's got to stop. It's got to stop. And I'm hoping my stories help trigger others to stand up and say something for themselves. And not HR. Get an attorney. And don't quit. Don't quit. I had an attorney that I worked with, and that was the message. HR wants you to quit, because now when you quit, there's nothing that you can do. But if you're still working and they're harassing you and you're getting unfair treatment, then there can be a case because you're still working there. So I'm not an attorney, but that's the message. Don't quit. and get the right help, the right legal help. But
that's a tough message too, because, you know, if your mental health is at stake every day, that's tough.
It is.
You know, it's tough to figure out what's your best thing to do for yourself, because there's problems each way, isn't there?
It sure
Don't
is.
answer that though. Don't answer that. We'll be here another 6 hours.
Isn't it the truth? There is something I have heard that there's corporate PTSD when people leave corporate, just because of the way that we're treated.
Yeah.
Do you believe in that?
I worked, absolutely. Well, I worked for the Department of Defense. So of course I do.
Yeah. All right.
Of course. Yeah. I had 22 EEO complaints at one point.
Yeah. I know.
So
yeah.
If people want to speak with you more or find out more about you, what's the number one place they should search you at?
I say my email, which is my name, deb@debcurtis.com. I'm here simply to be a shoulder to lean on, or another story to tell somewhere else, just to get the word out and be a voice of reason. So deb@debcurtis.com.
Thank you so much, Deb. Your story is inspiring. It really is. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you for listening in today. Please join us next week, same day and time. Also, I would love for you to check out my website, healthrivedream.com.